We begin today's shiur 13 lines from the top. The Gemara opens with a quote from the Mishnah. Mishahoya nosui shtei noshim umeis, a man who had been married to 2 wives. Bi'osa o chalitzasa shel achas men potera sarasa. The surviving brother can exercise his yibum option with one of them, either marrying her or releasing her through chalitza, and the other wife of the deceased brother is free to marry whomever she wants. On the side of the Gemara, we have our nosei mivneh heading. The topic is the nosei, and mivneh, the structural note, where you see a double underline feature. This is one of our series markings. These are hatzos. They highlight in the Gemara hatzos chilufiyos, alternative suggestions, ladin hamishna, alternative to that which the Mishnah taught. Shemisha mashir shnei Yevamos miyavno chotzim le'achas v'dayo. According to our Mishnah, the mitzvah of yibum is done with only one of the women, and that's enough. Well, let's now continue with the Gemara. Why can't he marry both of the widows? Again, we're dealing with Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Reuven died leaving 2 wives. The Mishnah says that Shimon will do the act, the mitzvahs of Yibum, only with one of the widows. He'll choose which one, but only one. Why can't he marry both? Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan, Amar Kro, Asher lo yiboneh es beis achiv. Bayis echonu boine, v'ein boine shnei batim. The pasuk speaks in the singular about a man who decides not to do yibum. So he is described as not having built his brother's house, and it's beis achiv in the singular. So, and a bias is also a term that can be used interchangeably with a wife. We'll see more about this later on as well. So one wife he is to build the deceased brother's name with, but not 2. Hence, this drosha excludes the option of marrying both widows. Question: V'nachlos l'travayu. Why don't we require chalitza? If chalitza is chosen to be done, do chalitza with both of them. Omar Marzutra bar Tuvia Omar Kro. Once again, a pasuk is cited. The pasuk says beis chalutza now. Again in the singular, grammatically speaking, singular. Bayis echad hu choletz ve'ein choletz shnei botim. The expectation is for him to do chalitza with one, not with 2. Uniyabem lechado v'nachlotz lechado. Why doesn't he do yibum with one and do chalitza with the other? Why is it that yibum with one is enough to release the second widow? Shouldn't we require chalitza for the second one? Omar Kro. The pasuk says in lo yachpoitz o chafetz yabem. If he doesn't, lo yachpoitz means if the yavam doesn't want to marry her, so he does chalitza. If he wants to marry her, he does yibum. And we develop a rule: kol oila libum oila lechalitza. He or she who is subject to yibum is subject to chalitza. Kol she'ein oila libum ein oila lechalitza. Someone who is not subject to yibum, after we proved before that you do yibum only with one and not with 2, so the other woman is not subject to yibum. Since she's not subject to yibum, she's not subject to chalitza. V'oid, and a second consideration: shelo yomru, people shouldn't say bayis miktsasa banui umiktsasa chalutz. We don't want people saying that Shimon built part of the house, part of the name of his brother, and the other part, the other wife, he released. The Gemara asks, v'yomru. So let people say that. Let us say that you do yibum with one, you do chalitza with the other, and if people say that the house is partially built and partially released, so be it. The Gemara answers, if what would take place would be strict adherence to order of events like this, that first yibum would be done and the second woman would be participant in a shoe removal ceremony, that would be okay. Elo, the problem is, Dilma Chalitz v'Hadar Meyabein. If we would say that one is to do both things, Chalitza and Yibum, he might do Chalitza first to one widow, and then marry the other widow, and that will be a big problem. The Kom Lei Belo Yiboneh. The pasuk before described that Chalitza, once Chalitza is done, so then the house is not built. And from that we derive that after Chalitza is done, the house is not to be rebuilt. It's forbidden to rebuild the house of the deceased, the family of the deceased. So that once Chalitza is done, the marriage to the second woman would be a violation of this drasha of Lo Yiboneh. V'emo ki iko chado tiskayim mitzvahs yibum. Ki iko tarti lo tiskayim mitzvahs yibum. Why not suggest that when there is one wife, one widow, so then the laws of Yibum apply. When there are two widows, so the laws of Yibum don't apply. There is a bracketed section that we will skip initially, and following we say that the answer to this question or this suggestion is Yevimto Riba. The presence of the word Yevimto multiple times indicates that not only if there's one Yevama do the laws of Yibum apply, but even when there are multiple widows, the laws apply. Now, within the brackets, we have a note on the side that by the star that says This we already did. The source that even if there are two wives, two widows, the dinim of Yibum, the mitzvah of Yibum applies. B'socha sograyim yesh nisayon loseis moker misvora shebetarti kayemes mitzvah Yibum avol svora zu nidchasa. Within the brackets, there's an attempt to respond to this suggestion of the Gemara that if there are two, there should be no mitzvahs yibum. And we want to say that's not so, based on some logic. But that logic will be rejected. So we'll be left with the issue of, so who's to say that maybe if there are two Yevamas, two widows, left by one brother, that the mitzvah of yibum does not apply. So now let's go through the bracketed section. On the heels of the Gemara's suggestion that if there are two widows, there's no mitzvahs yibum, in Cain, Soras erva, the osar rachmona lomali. The Torah, as we learned at the beginning of the Masechta, says that if, let's use a concrete example, you have Ruvain and Shimon. Ruvain is married to Shimon's daughter, uncle married niece, and Ruvain also has another wife. The Torah says that when Ruvain dies, leaving no children, so Shimon is exempt. There's no mitzvahs yibum, because the presence of his daughter in that marriage to the uncle she's obviously exempt from the yibum. A daughter's not going to marry her father, and likewise the co-wife is excluded. And the Torah goes out of its way to give a source for that the co-wife of an erva is asur in yibum. Why would that be necessary? Hashta shnayim bi'almo amris lav b'nei chalitza v'yibum ninu. According to your suggestion, when you've got two standard women, regular women, where you're not involving an erva whatsoever, according to your suggestion, the presence of two women is itself enough to release one from the rules of yibum and chalitza. Saras erva mibaya, would there be any need to speak about a yibum exemption in the case of a saras erva, where the co-wife of the erva is also exempted? Of course she's exempted. She's part of two wives, the erva and the tzara. The Gemara responds to that and says, Alomo lo itzderich? Why do you say that you wouldn't need a source to exempt the tzaras erva from yibum? I can tell you that in general, two Yevamas, two regular wives, without getting involved with ervas, the presence of two widows is exemption. And still I need a source for tzaras erva. And you'll ask why. So watch the Gemara. Salkadai techamina, without a special exemption for the tzaras erva, I would have thought erva avroi kaimo. that when Reuven is married to Shimon's daughter, so the daughter is called heir of a forbidden relationship to her father, Shimon. She, in our eyes, through our perception, is viewed as outside the picture. And if she were to be viewed as outside the picture, so let the co-wife engage in Yevum. The Torah, by giving a special source for Tsaras Erva, is telling me that co-wife is also forbidden in Yevum. But as far as when there are two Yevamos, two widows that survive their husband, what is the din? It could very well be, as we suggested, that they are also exempt. How do I know that when a man dies leaving two wives and a surviving brother, that the laws of Yevum apply? Yevimto, riba. The fact that the word Yevimto appears a couple of times, that includes the case of not only where one widow survives her husband, but even when two. Hoysachas kshera, we learned in the Mishnah that if a man left two wives, but one of them was disqualified from marrying Kohanim because she had been, let us say, a divorcee, and the other wife was non-divorcee, a single woman that was married for the first time, and Reuven dies leaving these two kinds of women, one puzzled to the kuna because she's a divorcee, Kohanim are not allowed to marry divorced women, and the other woman a straightforward widow right now. The Mishnah said that Shimon, if he should decide to do chalitza, he should do chalitza with the divorcee widow of Reuven. Divorcee, when we say that term, don't make a mistake. She was divorced from a previous husband, and Reuven married her, but she is disqualified from the kuna by virtue of the fact that she was once divorced. So the Mishnah said that if chalitza is the route that is chosen by Shimon, he should do the chalitza with the divorcee. A chalutza is a woman that is also disqualified for marrying Kohanim. Omer of Yosef, Kan Shona Rebbe, based on this Mishnah, Rebbe taught the following idea. Lo yishpach adam mei boiroi v'achirim tzrichim lehem. A person should not spill out his well water. He has good water, but he doesn't need it. He shouldn't spill it out and let it go to waste when other people can use it, other people can derive benefit from it. So too over here, the second wife of Reuven that was not a divorcee, she was a woman that, upon becoming a widow, she's kosher to marry the kuna. Why should Shimon ruin her from becoming the wife of a kohen eventually by doing chalitza with her? If you're going to do chalitza, do it with the woman that anyway is disqualified. Don't take a woman that's kosher right now to the kuna and ruin her when you had an option to do the chalitza with the other one. The Mishnah. Hamachzir Gushaso. A man who remarries the woman that he divorced, but in the interim she had married someone else. The Torah forbids this type of marriage, one who takes back his grusha. If she didn't marry someone in the interim, so it's a very fine thing to do to remarry the woman that you once divorced. But in the event that she married an outsider, it's forbidden for the first husband to take back the woman that he had divorced. Vanose chalutzaso, one who marries the woman that he had done chalitza with. Vanose kroivas chalutzaso, one who marries, let us say, the sister of the one he did chalitza with. Yotzi, he shall divorce them. V'havlad mamzer, divrei Rabbi Akiva. And if a child is born from any of these unions, the child is considered illegitimate, or as we call him, a mamzer. V'chachomim omrim ein havlad mamzer. The marriage might be prohibited, but the child that results is not labeled a mamzer. Umoidim, the chachamim concede benoisei kroivas gerushasoi shavlad mamzer. If someone divorced a woman and he would then marry her sister, the resultant child would be a mamzer. Rashi points out that a divorced woman, even though she's been divorced, she's considered like your wife, and therefore her sister or mother are chayiv krisus if you were to cohabit with them. It would create a chiv krisus, and therefore from a union like that, the resultant child would be classified as a mamzer. We now raise a question, and before we do so, we glance at the side under our nosei, our topic heading, birur. We want to clarify ha dikotoni b'shem Rabbi Kiva b'Mishnah, that which was said in the Mishnah in the name of Rabbi Kiva, hanosei krovas chalutzaso yotzi v'vlad mamzer. One who were to marry the sister of the woman that he did chalitza with, so the child that results would be considered a mamzer. The Gemara. V'sova Rabbi Akiva hanoisei kroivas chalutzaso havlad mamzer. Does Rabbi Akiva really hold that one who marries the relative of the chalutza, that the resultant child would be a mamzer? V'amar Reish Lakish kan shona Rabbi. Rabbi over here taught achos grusha midivrei Torah. The prohibition of marrying the sister of the woman you divorced, that's a Torah level isser, a Torah level prohibition. Achos chalutza midivrei soifrim. The marriage to a relative to the sister of a chalutza, that's only a rabbinic level prohibition. So how could it be that Rabbi Kiva would say regarding that anoisei kreves chalutzaso, the vlad is a mamzer? So the Gemara says, Tani, you have to reread or restate the Mishnah, kroivas gerushasai. When who marries the sister of the grusha, so the vlad that results would be a mamzer. Hochi nami mistabra. You notice we have a new geometric form, a house marking on the side under the mivneh heading. We term this a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of a give and take style Gemara with the point facing up. Nisyonos loymar shiesh bosis lishanos hagirs lios krovas grushaso. These are attempts to show that there's a basis for the change in girsa that we just did. The Gemara then had stated as a matter of fact that you shall change the girsa of the Mishnah. But now the Gemara tries to demonstrate that or give a basis for that change. And the inverted house represents a dechiyot, that we're going to reject this comment of hochi nami mistabra, so that you can leave the change in the girsa, but to suggest that it's based on other source information, that we won't be able to do. So now the Gemara. The Kotani Seifa. We're going to say that this girsa change is likely by that which it says in the Seifa. We saw this in the Mishnah, where the Chachamim had disagreed with several points that Rabbi Kiva had made, but they concede regarding one who's noisei krovas grushasa shavlad mamzer. If one marries the relative, for example, the sister of the woman he divorced, and that results in a child, the kid is a mamzer. He amers bishlama ayriba. If you say that in the Reisha the issue of kroivas grushasa was mentioned, hainu dekotani umoidim. Hence the expression in the Mishnah of the Chachamim conceding, it makes sense. They concede to one of the points that Rabbi Akiva had made. Eloi amris loy ayriba my moidim. If the example of kroivas grushasa was not mentioned at all in the Reisha, so what is the relevance of the word umoidim that you see in the Mishnah? The understanding is you don't concede to something unless that something was already mentioned. Vidilma ha kamash malon. Diesh mamzer mechayve krisus. It could be as follows: that even though the Rabbanon and Rabbi Kiva disagree with regard to chayve lavin, unions that are forbidden only to the tune of a lav. A lav is a negative commandment, but does not carry with it a kores penalty. So children that result from that type of union, of that type of cohabitation where there's an Isser Lav, so there the Chachamim say Mamzerus would not result. However, the Chachamim will concede to Rabbi Kiva where there's a Chiyuv Krisus, a Chiyuv of Kores, so that the term Umoidim could be on those grounds and not specifically to the case of Kroivas Grushoso. So to say that Hochinami Mistabra, that you should change the gears of the Mishnah based on the Seifa, that you can't do. The Gemara asks, Katani Lala Kamon, but that point is stated later on. This point of that there's mamzer from Chayve Krisus. It says, Ezu mamzer kol she'er basar shu below yavo divrei Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Shina Timni Omer kol shechayav melov kores bidei shamay balacha kidvarav. So there you see already a Tanaic source where you see Rabbi Shimon Timni is saying that only if there's a chiv kores will that be considered a mamzer. So if that's been taught later on, I don't need our Mishnah to teach that point. And if that be the case, so then you could go back and say that the Mishnah, when you saw Umoidim, is in fact referring to Krovas Grushaso. The Gemara responds, true, that's taught later on. V'dilma kososim lon tano k'Rabbi Shimon HaTimni. Maybe by our Mishnah saying that the Chachamim are moide, when the Chachamim say they're moide but Krovas Grushaso, that the Vlad is mamzer, what they're in effect saying is they're moide to that by Chivei Krisus you create mamzerus. Our Mishnah is establishing that halacha is like Rav Shimon HaTimni. So maybe you don't have a simple case of redundancy, but the role of our Mishnah is to establish the halacha like him, that only from a chiyuv krisus does mamzerus result. When we speak about mamzerus, my hope is that everyone is familiar with some of the rules that apply, but for those who don't know, a mamzer we will sometimes translate as illegitimate child, but he is someone that cannot marry into the community of Jews. He's quite limited in terms of whom he can marry. Let's continue though in the Gemara. Im Kain, if this rejection were correct, that the role of our Mishnah is to be soisein, to establish, to rule like Rav Shimon HaTimni, Lisni Shar Chayve Krisus, our Mishnah should have sought out other examples of chiyuv kores. Krovas Grushaso Lamali. Why specifically this unusual example? Elo Shma Mino Ayriba. Rather, it is in fact because in the Reisha it was spoken about. And that, as you can see, the last house marking is with the point facing upwards, indicating like we saw, Hochinami Mistabra, justifying the Girsa change. The Gemara asks, V'dilma li'olam lo ayriba. Maybe the Mishnah isn't speaking about Krovas Grushaso. V'aidi ditana machzir Grushaso v'noisei chalutzaso Krovas chalutzaso. And since in the Reisha the Mishnah mentioned all of these cases, Tani Nami Krovas Grushaso. We'll say a similar type situation. In other words, where not just the Grusha herself is referred to, but the Krovas Grushaso. Just like the Mishnah mentioned, Krovas Chalutzaso. So for the sake of, we'll say, balance or completeness, that's why Krovas Grushaso was mentioned. But not because in the Reisha you should change the Lashon to reflect or to state Krovas Grushaso, but rather the appearance of Krovas Grushaso was simply to, we'll say, round out the picture. So at this point then, we don't have necessarily grounds on which to say Hachi Nami Mistabra to justify the textual change within Rabbi Akiva. Ela Krovas Chalutzaso LeRabbi Akiva Have Mamzer. In fact, according to Rabbi Akiva, that is the case. One who marries the sister of the one he did chalitza with, the resultant child would be a mamzer. Omar Reb Chia bar Abba Omar Rav Yochanan Hainu Taimo de Rabbi Akiva. The basis of Rabbi Akiva, the Omar Kral, the pasuk says, Beis Chalutz Hanal Hakosuv Koroi Beso. The pasuk refers to the chalutza using the term beso. And as we saw earlier on the page, the term bias can refer to the wife or the woman. So that as far as Rabbi Akiva is concerned, a chalutza is not rabbinic, but it's a Torah level prohibition, and hence one can easily see how that could result in mamzerus. Not like we thought originally that the chalutza and hence her relatives would have only a divrei sofim, a rabbinic status, making it difficult for us to see how mamzerus could result. But once you say that it has a Torah level status, then the chalutza being called beso, and we learned that one who once a chalutza is released, you cannot marry her. And not only not marry her, but you can't marry her sister or her relatives either. And one who does, it would result in mamzerus. Don't forget that according to Rabbi Akiva, even chayve lavin, as long as they're Torah level prohibitions, they're Torah level negative prohibitions, the resultant children are mamzerim. Now, as we continue in the Gemara, a new marking appears. You'll notice a crown shape on the side. The crown highlights Shnei Lishonos Rav Yosef, two versions of Rav Yosef. Additionally, you see a triangle, and on the side of the Gemara we note Sidro Shel Meimros Beinyan Yuchasim Shemaschilin Da'Kol Moedim. HaGemara Tevarer Man HaKol Moedim. We'll see a series of comments that begin with the expression everyone agrees, and everyone agrees is something that the Gemara will try to find out who is this everyone agreeing to what is being said. So you'll see that the triangle appears here as number one, and number two appears well down the way of Omid Beis. Now the Gemara. Omar Rav Yosef, Omar Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe, Hakol Moidim b'machzir grushaso. Everyone agrees that one who remarries his divorcee, the woman that he divorced, after she had married another man in the interim, Shahavlad, we're at the top of Omid Bey, Shahavlad Pogum L'Kahuna, that the resultant child from such a union would be unfit to marry a Kohen. Which means that if a man divorced his wife and then took her back after she married someone else in the interim, and they had a daughter, that daughter would be unfit to marry the Kuna. It goes without saying, and I'm sure many of you are quite familiar, that the population of Kohanim have limitations concerning whom they can marry. So this would be another example of that, indicating that she is called a chalola. Man hakol moidim. Who is included in this? When Rav Yosef makes the comment that everyone agrees, who does he have in mind to include? Shimon Hatimni. The Afagav, the Omar Shimon Hatimni, even though Shimon Hatimni said, Ein mamzer mechayve lavin, in his disagreement with Rabbi Akiva, Shimon Hatimni took the position that mamzerus does not result from the union with a woman that represents a negative command. Nehi the mamzer lo have, granted that mamzerus doesn't result from that. Pogum mia havi mikal v'chomer me'almona. The status of being pogum, unfit to the kuna, does result, and that logic is through kal v'chomer reasoning based on the case of almona, the widow. Uma almona l'kohen gadol she'ein isura shava b'koil b'no pogum. If a kohen gadol marries a widow, which is a forbidden relationship, it's a negative command. The prohibition of marrying an almona is not something that is unique to, that is, let's say, present or apply across the board. Rather, it's unique to the kohen gadol. It's a special prohibition. So that's what the Gemara means when it says it's eino shava b'kol. And yet, b'no pogum, in a certain manner of saying, you could say it's a lower level prohibition, insofar as that it doesn't apply equally to all. It applies just to a kohen gadol. And yet, the child becomes classified as unfit to the kahuna. Zushi surah shava b'kol. This is an equal, across the boards prohibition. Men who divorce their wives cannot remarry them after they married another man in the interim. So it's an isur sheshava b'kol, eino din sheb'no pogum, and all the more so, the resultant child, the daughter that results, would not be fit to marry into the kahuna. The Gemara now rejects this logic, and it offers 3 points of rejection. A word of structure is necessary before we embark on the discussion. We glance at the side under the mivneh, the structural note. We have numbers 1 through 3. Al yedei shalosh ti'unim, through 3 claims or points. HaGemara menase litchois es Rav Yosef. The Gemara will try to reject Rav Yosef Shamar shekal v'chomer hu shavlad pogum, with his insistence that certainly the vlad is pogum. B'hemshech, in the continuation of the Gemara later on, HaGemara titche ti'unim shalosh v'shtayim. The Gemara will take issue by saying that that rejections 2 and 3 are not solid. They can be answered. Avol hataino rishoino ishoer. The first objection to Rav Yosef will remain. V'zeh yigroim la Gemara lahavi lishna shniyah shel Rav Yosef, and that will cause the Gemara to introduce a second version of Rav Yosef. So, having heard Rav Yosef and his conclusion that through kal v'chomer logic, that the vlad of a machzir grushoso would be pogum l'kahuna, we're now going to take issue with that. Just to repeat, the starting point of the kal v'chomer was the case of almona l'kohen gadol. With that in mind, number 1, ika l'mifrach. Note, of course, this is a long marking, a long dechia. We can challenge the kal v'chomer. Mal almona shekin hi atzma mischaleles. The reason that the child is pogum is because, you can argue, the woman becomes disqualified to the kuna. As an almona, as a widow, she could have married any other kohen, just not a kohen gadol. Now that the kohen gadol has this forbidden relationship with her as an almona, that ruins her, disqualifies her from marrying other kohanim in the future. So, in a case where a woman becomes, through this union, disqualified, I understand that the resultant vlad is disqualified. However, in the case of machzir grushoso, she doesn't become disqualified from the kuna through this union, the remarriage cohabitation with her. She was already disqualified because she was divorced initially. So this is a worst case scenario. V'oid, Furthermore, in the case of Machzik Rishaso, the Torah uses the expression Hi Toyeva Ksiv, which equals V'ein Boneha Toavim. In other words, she is considered an abomination. But the Pasuk is read with a limitation. She, but not her children. Her children are fine. The Oid Tanya. We have another Tanaic source that says Hamachzik Rishaso. V'hanoisei Chalutzaso. V'hanoisei Kroivas Chalutzaso. Let's skip the bracketed section initially. V'chachomim omrim yesh lo bo kiddushin utzricha imenu get v'hi sheira uvloda kosher. And here we want to emphasize the closing statement, the closing phrase uvloda kosher. So if we look at what we've dashed underlined, we have Machzik Rishaso, and the chachomim saying that the vlad is kosher, that the child is kosher. Leman, when we say it's kosher, kosher to whom? Lav lekahuna. Doesn't it mean kosher to the kahuna? So that would be the third objection to Rav Yosef. Now we read the source, but we skipped the bracketed section. So now let's go over the source for the sake of completeness. So we have a source that says Hamachzik Rishaso Vanose, one who remarries the woman he divorced, after having been married to someone else in the interim. Vanose Chalutza, so one who marries the woman with whom he did Chalitza. Vahanose Krovas Chalutza, so one who marries the sister or the mother of the one with whom he did Chalitza. Rabbi Kiva Oimer Ein Lo Ba Kiddushin. Rabbi Kiva says that type of bond does not take hold. It doesn't create a marital bond. Rabbi Kiva holds there is no tfisas kiddushin. Kiddushin, marriage doesn't take hold when you're dealing with a negative command, a violation, a prohibition that is a negative command status. The eino tzricha imenu get, and since there was no bond, when they want to split, they don't even need a get. V'hi psula, she becomes unfit to the kuna because of this illicit cohabitation. She becomes classified as a zona. That's a word you find in the Torah, and it's a type of woman that is unfit to the kuna. Uvlada apostle, the child is considered a mamzer. That's once again Shitas Rabbi Kiva, the opinion of Rabbi Kiva that mamzerus can result from chiyuvei lavin. The kaifin oisai lahosi, and we force him to separate from her, to send her away. The Chachamim, looking at this list of women, says Yeshlo Bal Kiddushin, there is a marital bond. If they want to split, they need a divorce document. V'hi Sheira, just because a violation took place in their marriage, that doesn't mean she's unfit. And Uvlada Kosher, and her child is kosher. Leman, when you speak about the child being kosher, well, to whom? Lav lekahuna, doesn't it mean kosher to kahuna? And unlike Rav Yosef, loy lakohol. This is now in defense. This, as far as point 3 is concerned, will tell you the vlad is kosher. It means it's not a mamzer. The child can marry into the kahal, the community of Jews, but not to the kohanim. The Gemara asks, and now here we have a marking that is featured on the side under the mivneh heading. This house marking is here for a ma'akaf, to keep track of the flow of the Gemara. This is a kushya. It's a question. Al hanisayon lahasbir hadikotani vlada kosher rak l'kohol avol posel l'kahuna. Kushyos emu boim laharois davlad kosher af l'kahuna udolok Rav Yosef. The question here is designed to challenge the point that defended Rav Yosef. So we just tried to defend Rav Yosef, and now we're going to challenge that with a question. If you're going to explain that Vlada kosher means he can marry into the community, he kshera leman, when you describe the woman as kshera, well, kshera to whom? If you're going to say, well, she's kosher to marry other Jews eventually, pshita, that's obvious. Mishum de zanya ifsal alakahol. because she behaved in a wayward fashion in illicit relations, that you would think would render her unfit to other Jews? That's not so. You would never have thought that. Elo lav l'kahuna. When the source says regarding the woman that she is kshera, it means kshera to the kahuna. Umidihi l'kahuna, vlada nami l'kahuna. And just like we say the woman is kshera to the kahuna, otherwise you would be telling me something that's too obvious. If you're telling me something in a Tanaic source, it's got to have some chidush value to it. So we're telling you that she's still kshera to the kahuna. Her child also is kosher to the kahuna, and that's not like Rav Yosef. The Gemara asks, Midi Irya, who says that that's how it has to be speaking? Ha k'di Isa v'ha k'di Isa. When it speaks about the woman, one standard applies. When it talks about the child, another standard applies. What applies to the woman, to the mother, doesn't necessarily apply to the child. So that when it says that she is kshera, that means she's kshera l'kahuna. When it says the vlad is kosher, all it means is kosher l'kohol, but still pogum l'kahuna. And if you accept that, well then, that will reinstate Rav Yosef. And Hochi Nami Mistabra. The Gemara even wants to push this point ahead and say that the reading of the source should be in this Ha K'di Isa fashion. The Katani Reisha. It says in the Reisha, within Rebbe Akiva, within Rebbe Akiva, it said that he psula uvlada pasal. Within Rebbe Akiva, he psula leman. When you speak about the forbidden cases and the woman becomes rendered unfit to whom? If you were to think that because of the illicit relationship she becomes unfit to marry other Jews, because she was mezaneh, do you think she becomes also to the Jewish nation? That's not true. Rather, it means that she becomes pasul, because of the illicit relationship, becomes pasul to marrying kohanim. Uvlada pasul leman. When you say the vlad is pasul, well, pasul to whom? Ilema lekahuna. If you think that it means that the vlad is pasul to the kahuna, halakal kosher, but the child, the result of a negative command, illicit relationship between the parents, the child would be kosher. Lakahal ha'omer Rabbi Kiva havlad mamzer. But Rabbi Kiva already has said that the result of chayvei lavin, violations of a negative command, results in mamzerus, and the child is not kosher lakahol. Elav shita lakahol. When the source said under Rabbi Kiva's name that the vlad is pasul, it means pasul lakahol. Now, what about the woman? The woman, though we establish, is kshera lakahol. She's pasul. When Rabbi Kiva said pasul regarding the woman, he meant pasul lakuna. Regarding the vlad, when he says pasul, that means pasul lakahol. Umida reisha ha k'di Isa v'ha k'di Isa. And just like in the reisha, there is a double standard. Seifa nami ha k'di Isa v'ha k'di Isa. With regard to the seifa as well, we can say that the woman is kshera. That means kshera la kahuna, and the vlad is kosher la kahol, but pasul la kahuna, and that's fine as far as Rav Yosef is concerned. So that what we thought in our numbering of the objections before, we thought that vlad kosher meant kosher la kahuna. No, vlad kosher means la kahol, but pasul la kahuna. You may have noticed that we had a number 3, a few lines up in parentheses. That was simply to highlight that we were rejecting the opposition to Rav Yosef, opposition number 3. And now we look at opposition number 2 that was raised before, and show that too is not a problem for Rav Yosef. Vehi to'eva nami. Notice we have a little star also to the side of the Gemara text. You can see where this is coming from above. That which we said before, that he to'eva, that the relationship of the woman to the man from the Matzi Grushoso, where the Torah says he to'eva, that's an abomination. She's an abomination, leaving us to think that the child is not an abomination. Don't say that. That would have been, of course, an objection to Rav Yosef, but don't say that. Rather, the he to'eva nami means he to'eva v'ein sarosa to'eva. The co-wife of that grusha that had been taken back, if that man dies, leaving no children, the tzara, the co-wife, is kshera for yibum. She's acceptable to a yibum marriage. So that the limitation, he to'eva, she, the matzi grushaso, is unfit, is an abomination, but not her co-wife. But the resultant children are to'avim, are an abomination. Hence they are considered pogum lakuna, just like Rav Yosef said. Ela almona kashya. The objection that we had to Rav Yosef from the case of almona, that remains an objection. In the case of almona, if you recall, we said that there the vlad is pogum because she becomes unfit to the kuna, becomes disqualified. Not so in the case of Machzir Grushosa, where she was already disqualified from the initial gerushin. And that's what the Gemara spells out now. Ela almona kashi, but the case of almona remains a problem for Rav Yosef. Ma almona shekain hi atzma mischaleles, where she herself becomes disqualified. Therefore, her child becomes unfit to the kuna. Not so in the case of Machzir Grushoso, where that didn't cause her to be disqualified to the kuna. Therefore, this union after he takes her back doesn't result in a child that's disqualified either. Ela itmar hochi itmar Omar Rav Yosef Omar Rabbi Shimon Barevi Hakol Moedim Bebo al Chayve Krisus Shavlad Pogum. This is a second version, a second presentation of Yosef, where he's now quoting Rav Shimon Rebbe, saying that everyone agrees that a man who has relations with a woman that generates a chiyuv kores, a punishment of kores, that the vlad is pogum. Man hakol moedim. Who is conceding over here? Rebbe Yehoshua. This is Rebbe Yehoshua who is conceding that the child is unfit to the kahuna. Even though Rebbe Yehoshua says that mamzerus does not result from a chiyuv kores, nehida mamzer lo have, granted mamzerus doesn't result, pogum mio have mikal v'chomer me'almona. The child being disqualified from the kuna can be determined through kal v'chomer logic, using as your starting point the almona, just as we saw before. Uma almona l'kohen gadol shein isur shava bakol b'na pogum. Mind you, the almona to a kohen gadol, which is a unique prohibition, unique only to the kohen gadol, a low-level prohibition, and yet the child is unfit to the kuna. Zu sheisura shava bakol, a woman that you are prohibited in marrying, punishable by kores, brother marrying his sister, for example. That's an isur that is equal to all. Eino din shebena pogum, all the more so. Certainly, the child that results from a brother marrying his sister would be unfit to the kahuna. V'chitema, and if you try to object to this kal v'chomer on the grounds ma'almona shikehi atzma mischaleles, that the almona herself becomes disqualified to the kuna, and that's why the vlad is disqualified. Hachanami kevon sheboalo asazon. If a brother has relations with his sister, for example, which is a chiyuv kores, that renders her unfit to the kuna on the grounds of being classified as a zoina. So that you do have this Kal V'chomer logic, leading to Rav Yosef's conclusion that Rav Yoshua would concede that a child born from a union of Chiyuvei Krisus, the child is unfit to the Kahuna. Even though the child's not a mamzer according to Rav Yoshua, he is nevertheless unfit to the Kahuna. Now, as we saw earlier by way of markings, the Hakol Moedim theme continues here, and that's why we have another triangle. And on the side, under the Mivneh heading, you see a diamond appears with a double underline marking, Shnei Deos al Man Hakol Moedim. In other words, a comment will be made here, and we will see two opinions as to who the Hakol Moedim is in this case. The sugya itself continues down Mem Hey Amar Aleph, but we start it right now. Omar Rabbo Bar Bar Chanom Rav Yochanan Hakol Moedim Be'eved Ve'oved Kechavim Habo Abbas Yisrael Shavlad Mamzer. Everyone will agree that a slave or an idol worshiper, a Gentile that has relations with a Jewish woman, that the child is considered a mamzer, is considered illegitimate, and hence would be forbidden to marry other Jews. And the chiddush being here that even though the mother is Jewish, that is not going to prevent the kid from being classified as a mamzer. That even though, technically speaking, a mamzer is a Jew, but nevertheless, the child cannot be viewed as a Jew allowed to marry others. This, by the way, is a very timely type of topic. Basically, in one word, it's called intermarriage. The emphasis being on the non-Jewish or slave male cohabiting with the Jewish female. This is a very controversial topic, halachically speaking, in terms of what is the conclusion, the halachic status of the child. There are many opinions saying the child is illegitimate, and there are other opinions that we'll see later in the sugya that says that as long as the mother is Jewish, the child is kosher, is not a mamzer. But here we have a statement that everyone agrees that the vlad is a mamzer. So the Gemara asks, Man hakol modim, who is conceding here to the kid being a mamzer? Answer, Shimon hatimni. Diafagav diomar Shimon hatimni. Ein mamzer mechayve lavin. Even though Shimon hatimni says that unions of negative commands do not result in mamzerus. And here we have an example of a negative command, intimacy between a slave and Jewish woman, or Gentile and Jewish woman, is not chayav b'kores, and certainly not misas bezdin. Nevertheless, it is a chiyuv lav, and Shimon HaTimni is on record as saying that mamzerus does not result from chiyuvei lavin, from violations of a negative command. Hani mili. We continue at the top of Mem Hey Amud Aleph. This is true. Mechayve lavin de tapsivu kedushin. That's when you're dealing with a negative command involving a type of a relationship that marriage takes hold. Tapsi ba behu kedushin. That kedushin, which is marriage, takes hold. Aval hacha oivei teichavim ve'eved. Kevan delo tafsi behu kedushin, since the marital bond does not exist between Jew and slave or non-Jew, and Rashi gives the sources for that. Since there's no marital bond, they become like chayve krisus domi. Imagine a brother and sister, which is a classic example of chayve krisus. They don't bond to form a bond of marriage. And of course, one of the nafkaminas of that, one of the practical outcomes is when they split, they don't need a get because there was no marital bond formed in the first place. So if a non-Jew and Jew marry one another, there's no need for a get. They just part ways when they decide to do that, which of course is the right thing to do, but they don't need a get. There's no tfisas kedushin. So since the case of Eved and Oved Kechavim have this in common with Chayve Krisus, that there's no tfisas kedushin, just like Chayve Krisus results in mamzerus, so too Eved and Oved Kechavim will result in mamzerus. Meisvei, the Gemara raises an objection. Oved Kechavim ve'Eved haboa bas Yisrael havlad mamzer. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer ein mamzer elo mimi she'isuro isur erva v'onush kores. Now, this expression is just like Shimon HaTimni's position, and you see here that Shimon HaTimni, which parallels the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, is saying that there is no mamzerus unless it's an erva, which is a list of forbidden women in the Torah, and it carries with it a penalty of kores. So you can't say that Shimon HaTimni would be the one to concede that Eved or Eved Kechavim Abo Abbas Yisrael, the vlad is a mamzer. So when it was said over here by Rabbi Babrachana, 3 lines from the bottom of Mem Daled Amid Beis, that Hakol Moedim, that the vlad is a mamzer, to suggest that the Hakol Moedim, the conceding opinion, is that of Shimon HaTimni, that's not so. Elo Omer Rav Yosef Man Hakol Moedim Rebbe. The Hakol Moedim, the one that's going to concede to mamzerus from the Eved or the Eved Kechavim Abo Abbas Yisrael, that's Shitas Rebbe. And the Gemara goes on to show that Af al Gav the Omar Rebbe, Af al Gav the Rebbe Omer, even though Rebbe says Ein hadvorim halolu amurim elo l'divrei Rabbi Akiva, this concept of Bia achar chalitza, that if one has relations with a chalutza in attempting to marry her, that it doesn't take hold, that is something only Rabbi Akiva would say. She'oise chalutza ke'erva. He views the chalutza as an erva. V'lei lo svirolei. Rebbe does not agree with that. Nevertheless, and we should point out that Bia with the chalutza is a negative command, and to suggest that there's no tfisas kiddushin with the chalutza, that's only something Rabbi Akiva would say. Rebbe himself doesn't hold by that. But Oved Kechavim ve'Eved moide. However, with regard to a bonding, or let's say intimacy with an Eved or an Oved Kechavim, Rebbe will concede that the child is a mamzer. The Chiyotza Rav Dimi Omer Rav Yitzchok Bar Avudimi Mishum Rabbeinu, and Rabbeinu is Rebbe. When Rav Dimi came, he said, Oved Kechavim ve'Eved Habo Abbas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. Before we sign off, let's first take a look at a Rashi. Just a cross mirror line or two down. Afagav de Koma Rebbe beperik Rabbi Gamliel ein bia achar chalitza the im cholatz lezu ubal lezu ein otzricha meno get. That if chalitza was done with one of the Yevamos, and then he has intimacy, he's then boel, does yibum with another one, there is no need for a get. V'komer ein hadvarim halalu amurim the bio achar chalitza lo tov selo divrei Rabbi Akiva. This idea that that nothing takes hold when you have bio done after chalitza, that's only something Rabbi Akiva would hold by. Avo l'didei lo svirale, Rebbe doesn't hold by that. Afilu hachi b'oved kechavim ve'eved moedim. But however, in the case of Eved Kechavim, Eved and Oved Kechavim, they would be of like mind. And since there's no tfisas kiddushin, the bonding doesn't take hold, the resultant child would be classified as a mamzer. So that you see from here that Hakol Modim could very well be Rebbe. who concedes that even though with regard to another matter he disagrees with Rabbi Akiva, but on this count he would agree.